Hey y'all, it's me, Casby. On today's episode of Not For Nothing, I sit down with an insanely talented 20-something who recently moved in faith to New York City to chase his God-given dreams of pursuing fashion. He is Tavian Teage. Hey Tavian, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited that you're technically our first guest
I
on the
know,
Not For
it's
Nothing
crazy.
podcast. But also, I'm so glad that you reached out because I feel like our stories are kind of similar in some areas, but I'm also just so excited to hear your wisdom, your insight, and everything that your story entails. And I hope this is a safe space for you to share. And yeah, I'm just really excited that you're here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. When you text me that I might be like the first person, I was like, whoa, that's I felt so much pressure. Little old me. But yeah, it's really awesome. I'm really glad that I'm very happy for you, very proud of you for taking this step. The day you posted the video about like the story behind Not For Nothing, I sat right there and I watched it from beginning to end. And I thought it was just so beautiful. So yeah, I'm just excited to be a part of.
I love that. I feel like we've been friends for what feels like a really long time. I think we
Yeah,
met in 2021. I was trying to remember the other day. And
yeah,
I had just started ministry school and I was like, my head was spinning. I had no idea what I was doing. I went on the Orlando trip that we took
yes.
as like our spring trip or whatever. And I didn't know a
Mhm.
soul. And you're one of the only ones that like talked to me, was nice to me. And I was like, okay, wait, I kind of vibe with him. And so it was really nice having you on that trip. But I think let's just start there. Like SCU in general, going to ministry
Yes.
school. I know that's an unpopular decision for kids our age, and coming out of high school and being like a semi-adult, I'd say in your 20s. How did
Yeah.
you make that decision to start ministry school? How was your story impacted by that, and how did it come to a close and everything like that? Fill us in on all the details of ministry school.
Yeah. So that was honestly, I feel like there are some people whose stories are like they know like I'm gonna graduate high school, I'm gonna go to like a ministry school, I'm gonna do ministry for like there are some people who have that mindset and I love that for them. That could not have been any further than my story. Um, I was at FSCJ. I was just getting my bachelor's, and I knew I was going not my bachelor's, getting my associates, and I knew I was going to transfer after I got my AA. And so I would say going into my last semester of um, college at pursuing my AA, I had just joined Celebration Church, like just started going there full time as a member. And I feel like everything just happened so quickly for me. I like joined the church at the beginning of that year. By like mid spring, I was on the worship team. And then, like, by the time summer came around, I was like serving in young adult ministry. And so it just was like back to back. And so I met a girl who's a good friend of mine now. Her name's Shannon. She was at the time the enrollment counselor. And yeah, over the summer, I was like, yeah, I'm trying to figure out what I want to do, like what school I want to go to. And I ended up finding out about SEU, went to a couple of like vision nights, and yeah, that following semester I started the process of going for my bachelor's through SEU. And so it was like perfect. I was already at church all the time because I was serving a whole bunch, and so it just was um, a really really great opportunity. And I think it was one of those things where I think I learned so much being in ministry school. I feel like it's one of those things too where like there's a lot of like not like stigma, but ministry school can be that thing where like it's good, but we're
Yeah.
human, so anything man-made is gonna have its highs and lows.
Yeah.
And so I just remember like I know that like the person I am now has so much to do with like my yes in that season to like make the switch from like traditional college to going to ministry school. And I think it like there are so many things that I understand now, and it's not like I'm this big theologian, but like I'm so grateful from a spiritual perspective that like sure, I was learning graphic design and that's what I got my degree in and that's awesome, but like I took a whole class, a whole semester just learning about the Old Testament, just learning about the New Testament, and like so many things that I feel like set me up very well for
Yeah.
different things that I walk through, like just in my faith. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a decision I'm definitely grateful for. I've met so many of my closest friends, you being one of them, like through going to
Yeah.
ministry school. And so, yeah, I think it was a really great decision. I'm really, really grateful for it.
Interesting. My take, so my decision on ministry school was kind of the same of like, it wasn't the norm. Like, nobody was like, oh, yes, like we graduated off to ministry school. Like, it was not talked about a lot. And
Yeah.
it kind of had a stigma to it. It was like, okay, you're
Hmm.
going to ministry school to become a pastor. And it's like, no, no, no.
Right.
Like, you can go and pursue other things. And I got in ministry school, was pursuing ministry, like, Christian theological stuff. I was passionate about it. And then I was like, wait, like there's some weird role issues in the church of like women can't be leaders, all this stuff. And it really
Mm,
turned me off to it. And there was a season where I was like, I don't think I'm supposed to be here anymore. And like I contemplated going to FSCJ or another community college in the area. And the Lord was like, no, you need to stay. And I was like, are you sure? Like, I don't know. I don't really fit in. Like, I don't really know what I'm studying. But those classes, like the random Old Testament classes or the random classes where I was like, I'm not even going to use this in the future, I definitely did. But it was like a deeper way to grow my faith, which like at a
yeah.
time you don't really see, and you just see it as like, oh, it's just like another Bible class or whatever. But down the road, you're definitely thankful for it.
Hmm.
I know there was a time where I kind of questioned if I would do things differently. Did you ever have that moment in ministry school where you were like, I wonder what it would have been like if I went to a bigger university like UF, FSU, something like that? Did you ever hit that point where you're like, I should have done that, or do you have any regrets in that sense?
I think when I think back to college, the only thing I regret is like I feel like a lot of things that I went through or my experiences in education, both with high school and with college, were just untraditional. So like my high school was not your traditional high school; it was like a trade school. So we didn't have like a whole bunch of sports programs and all these things. So it was more career focused. And
Yeah.
so my high school experience was very untraditional. And so similarly, I feel like going to ministry school, it made my college experience like very untraditional. So there was no, there was no big games to go to and like all these like different things, just
Yeah.
because it just wasn't the traditional route. And I think missing some of the fun. I'm a very social person, as you know, and so I think that's like the biggest like I'm like, oh dang, I wish I could have, gone to a pep rally in college or like done all these like
Yeah.
stereotypical college activities. But
Yeah.
other than that, that's the only thing that like I air quotes like regret about my college journey. I honestly think it was like so much mercy of the Lord. He was like, "Yeah, you would be unstoppable in the worst possible way if I let you go anywhere else
That's so true.
during that season of your life." I'm like, I would have been off the rails if I was
Yeah.
anywhere other than SEU. and
Oh
so,
yeah. Oh
and
yeah.
I feel like the Lord knew that. He was like, "Yeah, we're gonna put you over here because it's safe here."
Yeah.
So no, I have no regrets. I think I was exactly where I needed to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple football games would have been cool, but other than that, no regrets.
Yeah, I feel the same. I feel like the Lord was like, if you would have gone to a university, you would have been absolutely feral, like lost your mind. And I was like, that's
Yes,
really fair
yes,
because I definitely could have been. And it was a safe space to fall short and like mess
yes.
up and things that like we're prone to do. That was the safest space to do that in because you had so many people in your corner that
Yeah.
were willing to catch you, that were willing to help you and encourage you. And if you would have like done any of those things at a bigger university where it wasn't that like one-on-one encouragement, it would have been like, oh, okay, like you figure it out. And then I've been like, okay, wait, now I'm kind of going insane, like mentally insane.
Yeah.
And I would have been like totally unstable because I feel
Mm,
like where God isn't, and I'm big not saying anything about universities, people who go to them, but where God isn't totally the main focus, I feel like a lot of people lose track, and then
mm,
it's hard to get plugged into a new church, and it's scary. And as a college student, you have way a bigger selection of things that you want to be doing on a Sunday morning, I'm sure.
yeah.
And so I think when having that stability, especially when we're in those like early 20 years, is so important. And that's so funny you said that because I feel the same way. I'm like, I could have gone feral at some football games and some parties. I did go to a few SCU football games, and I
Yeah,
was like,
same.
never mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we made like maybe one touchdown, and I was like, okay, I think I'm way better off going to like one UF game or a one university game and just like calling it
Yeah.
quits. I think we're very similar in that. So tell us a little bit about your degree. So obviously, so if you don't know Tavian, he's an incredibly artistic guy. I mean, his artistic eye, his eye for fashion, his eye for design is insane. How did that kind of come about to where you were like, did you just wake up one morning and you're like, I think that's the only thing that I really want to pursue? Or was it something that had started at a young age or in high school? Like, how did you kind of come about that desire?
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like from the time I could hold a crayon, I feel like I've always just been like just a really creative person. And so from a super young age, it started off with just like drawing. So I used to sketch and draw all the time. A piece of paper and like a color pencil, hate to see me coming. Like that was like the energy all the time. But yeah, so I grew up drawing like more like traditionally, and then I got into painting. And so there was a point in my life, more like middle school, where I was like, I had the idea to be like like a full-time like traditional artist. Like, oh my gosh, maybe I can be like this big painter or whatever.
Yeah.
Very thankful for my art teacher who was like, I love that. Maybe let's shoot higher. You're probably not going to be able to pay your bills as an artist. And I was like, I appreciate you for that. And so, but I continued like drawing and stuff or whatever. And then towards the end of my middle school journey, I got introduced to Photoshop. And the rest was history. Like I
Wow.
said, the high school I went to was like a career school, and so I literally was learning graphic design like as a freshman in high school. But yeah, and so that was the first time I ever opened any Adobe programs like in high school, and so
Wow.
I would say in high school is when I started to get into the idea of like, okay, this could be a career path.
Mhm.
And so I just kept learning and kept, you know, doing the things. I also learned photography when I was in high school.
Okay.
It really was a really great opportunity. I'm so grateful that I was able to go to that school, and it really set me up for so many things.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of where it started. Did a lot of that in high school, and then I was like, cool, like I think I want to be a graphic designer. I can see myself doing that. I grew up in a big family, and so like money always like wasn't like something that we, things were always like tight. And
Yeah.
so in the process of me like drawing things, something I used to always love drawing was like clothing. And so like we would go like school
Mhm.
shopping, and I vividly remember there was one day we went school shopping, and I had like walked away from my mom. I was like picking things up, and I like brought her like a stack of clothes. I was like, oh my gosh, I want these things. And my mom was like, I'm so sorry, like I can't get you those. It's
Aw.
like, okay, whatever. So I remember putting them back. I went home that same day, and I literally drew everything I had picked up and had like 3 pages of just like outfits based on what I saw at the store,
Wow.
just like drawn in a notebook.
Yeah.
And so that's always been like a little thing, and I'm just dropping that there because I'm sure it'll be
Oh yeah.
relevant soon here. But yeah, and so did graphic design, photography through high school. Graduated high
Mhm.
school, and I don't remember when I bought this camera. Maybe I bought it with graduation money. But anyway, I got my hands on a camera, and so the first few years after high school, I was a freelance designer and photographer. But yeah, and so I did that for a little while, and then that's kind of what led me to doing it like in ministry school as well. Like I wanted to get my degree in graphic design, and so yeah, and so that's kind of how I got to that point. It really started off just me drawing as a kid, and then
Wow.
discovering that like, oh, you can draw digitally and you can make digital art. Like that's also a cool
Wow.
thing. And yeah, and that's kind of how that's what gave me the motivation to like get my degree in that.
Yeah, that's so cool though, like the nuggets that God leaves for us. Like, how in
Mm,
the world, like, could you have ever connected, like, hey, I've been drawing as a kid, and then, like, spoiler alert, now you kind of do that for a living? And, like,
yeah,
how cool is that to be able to, like, connect those dots to be like, I love that ever since I was a kid, and, like, God kind of
yes,
revealed that to me at such a young age. But also, like, if you wouldn't have not gotten those clothes, you would have gotten them not even given them a second thought. But the fact
yeah,
that you had to go through that allowed you to be able to go home and draw. Like the Lord was kind of leading you to that. I think that's so
hmm,
cool.
yeah,
Especially in like the freelance space. So I
hmm,
did freelance for a little bit and it was scary because I was like, I'm not working a 9 to 5. I'm not getting a regular paycheck. And, you
yes.
know, like your little bills here and there, it's kind of scary to provide for yourself, pay rent, everything that's astronomical these days. How did that feel for you when you were doing kind of the freelance area of graphic design? Like, did that ever kind of like freak you out? Did you have something on the side? Like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so at the time I was working part time in retail, and so I think kind of to your point, like it's kind of cool to look back and see the little like building blocks as the Lord is like
Mm-hmm.
putting things in place. But yeah, I had my first like I won't say like big kid job because I feel like when people say that they mean corporate, but I feel like my first like serious like was actually making like decent money job. I was working part time at Forever 21,
Okay.
and so when I wasn't working at the store, that's when I was doing designs for clients or doing photo shoots, and so I definitely agree. I didn't have any like I was still living at home, and so I didn't have any like
Mm-hmm.
major bills.
Yeah.
But it definitely was hard. Like it's not any creative role, especially from a freelance perspective. It's just not always consistent, and so kind of having really busy seasons. Like the spring was always really busy because I was doing graduation photo shoots and like those kind of things, or like headshots and things for whatever reason picked up a lot during like the spring. But then like there's not a whole lot going on over the summer, so that's a little bit drier.
Yeah.
And so like it was kind of getting used to those seasons of like when business was booming or when it wasn't. Um, but yeah, it definitely was a struggle. Just the inconsistency of it. Like with the 9 to 5, like you're working 9 to 5, 40 hours a week. You know what you're getting. You know what's coming
Yeah.
in. It's a lot easier, and you're usually making a little bit more. Like it's easy
Yeah.
to kind of manage that. But when it's kind of just based off bookings, and when people reach out to you, it's like it can definitely be, um, yeah, a little bit of a toll. But we got through
Yeah.
it. We got through
Yeah.
it.
It's almost like you have this like automatic faith that kicks in. It's like, God, I know that you're gonna provide, but like it's kind of getting a little scary. Like I'm gonna need that
Literally.
book. I'm gonna need that next job or that next gig kind of quick. I think just the lead up of where you are now, so we can kind of jump into there if you want.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about. So obviously we talked about ministry school, how that all looked for you. We just talked about kind of your childhood to now, but let's talk about a little bit deeper into like your testimony, and then we'll talk about obviously your career of what that looks like, what you're doing today, and all the big guy moves that you've made recently and everything.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your childhood. Like, what did that look like when you were growing up? Is there any like big moments where you're like, this is really something that is going to be a big part of my testimony?
Hmm. I can't think of anything like super young. I feel like, at least not like really, really young. I didn't really grow up, or I guess I semi grew up like in a faith household. So basically, my parents, my mom and my stepdad, um, they got saved when I would say somewhere between like fifth and sixth grade for me.
Wow.
So it was very new. Like as a kid, like elementary school, younger, like going to church on Sundays and like hearing gospel music throughout the house was like not super common. I think
Yeah.
my exposure to church or to faith at a young age came from like the elders of my family, my great aunts, my grandparents. Like that's kind of where that came from. But yeah, so my parents started going to church and they got saved around the time that I was in middle school. Um, and I would say I look back I look back at middle school as like one of the most honestly just like impactful parts of my life. I think it is for a lot of people. Like, so much mentally and socially is happening in your life during like that time.
Yeah.
And so I am yeah, and so I was new to faith, and so I was processing what that looked like for me as a 12, 13-year old trying to process this relationship with Jesus, and it was a struggle for sure. I think one of the biggest things that I dealt with in my childhood, or I guess you can say like middle school, high school, was like identity was a really, really big thing for me. I'm a very in my head kind of person, and so and like in middle school, I it was actually really a cool story. But like from middle school, from like sixth grade to eighth grade, I feel like one day I'm gonna write like a book or make a movie or something about it because it's just
Yeah.
so I don't know. I
Speak that
I love
out.
I love the story about it, but I
Yeah.
pretty much came into middle school, sixth grade, being bullied a lot, like ridiculously bullied. Not like take your lunch money, but people just verbally were just like
Yeah.
verbally were really mean, and
Yeah.
so thankfully I had friends at the time who were like bigger than me or more popular than me, and so like they stood up for me. But by the time I got to eighth grade, like I think seventh grade, I was like, okay, I'm not repeating what last year looked like. I'm gonna stand up for myself more, speak up more, and I did that. And it wasn't always easy, but I think I took up more space in seventh grade. And then by the time eighth grade came around, I was like top of the food chain. I like oh my gosh, I was like
Wow.
I was like playing sports. I was like in a bunch of like academic activities. I was really well known, and so it's just a really cool story. I think from like just seeing how like that kind of happened. But a really big thing that I was processing during middle school, honestly, was like my attraction. Like, okay, we're kids, we're starting to go through puberty,
Yeah.
we're starting to feel things,
Yeah.
and I remember like honestly, my whole life, I even like thinking back to like elementary school, there were like little signs and little things that I think back on now. But basically, by the time middle school came around, I realized like okay, well, Samantha's really pretty. But the same feelings that I'm feeling towards Samantha, I also kind of feel towards Joe. And so I'm like, what is this? Like, what's going
Yeah.
on?
Yeah.
And so I remember like my sixth grade year of middle school being like le- legitimately just confused. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't even know how to process what is happening in my brain. And I remember this girl came to our school in seventh grade, and it was like the talk of the town was so much gossip because apparently she was out and she was like bisexual, and so
Mm-hmm.
everyone was like freaking out about it. And so
Mm-hmm.
me, just ignorant, was like, I don't even know what that means. What is that? And so one of my friends explained it to me, and mentally I'm like, oh, okay, maybe that's what this is. Like I
Mm-hmm.
have this like dual attraction thing happening, so like clearly that must be what it is.
Yeah.
And so that same school year, my seventh grade school year, I like came out as bi to like everyone, and it was like whatever,
Wow.
you know. I
Mm-hmm.
think this was like an era where like coming out really, really was like being championed, and like, or
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't know. I mean, obviously, like queer culture has been around for forever, so it's not like a new thing. But I feel like
It was the
2011,
thing.
2012, yeah, I feel like 2011, 2012, like
Yes.
everybody you knew was gay or lesbian or bi. Like people were just
Yeah.
coming out left and right. Um, and so during that era, like when I was having those conversations with people, they were like, "Oh my gosh, that's so awesome!" You know, like thanks for sharing with me, blah blah whatever. And so
Mm-hmm.
only for me to then go home to my parents who are new in their faith, and they're like, absolutely not. What are you talking about? They're like pulling out anointing oil, and they're like,
You're like, wait a
no,
minute. Did I
yeah,
make that? Did I make that
yeah,
up?
like what is going on here? Um, and so yeah, and so it began. I would say like seventh, eighth grade began this like the initial like wrestle of like, okay, so
Yeah.
actually this is something that the Lord is really not a fan of. And so
Yeah.
now what am I supposed to do with like wanting to get close to God, but also having these very real feelings?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and so going into eighth grade, I pretty much like just kind of acted as if God didn't exist because I was just like,
Mm-hmm.
it was just a lot going on for me socially. Like I said, it was
Yeah.
like one of the more social highs of my life, and so I just was
Mm-hmm.
more focused on what my life looked like socially.
Yeah.
And but I remember eighth grade ended. I was like, I don't really think, I don't know. People are weird. Middle school relationships, do they count? Do they not count? Who knows?
Mm.
But there was there was a guy, like a friend of mine. We were really good friends, but we pretty much like had like this weird like tension,
Mm-hmm.
like flirting thing all throughout eighth grade.
Yeah.
We found out we were going to different high schools, and he was like, respectfully delete my number, and I was like, oh,
Oh,
okay.
wow. Okay.
And so after I mourned the loss of that non-existent relationship, the Lord was like over the summer before high school started. The Lord was like, "Cool, great. So now that that's over, can you come back to me now?" And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, "Okay, you know what? Yes,
Bet.
my bad, God, my bad. Here I am, whatever." And so I spent all summer just like really, really like pouring into my relationship with the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Only for the first day of ninth grade, I sat next to a girl who I was friends with in middle school,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like 8 a.m. in the morning, and the first thing she says to me is like, "Are you still bi?" And no, literally me. And so it was like it was one of those moments where like the world pauses, everything
Yeah.
freezes. Like there's like
Yeah.
an angel on one shoulder, a little devil on the other, and they're like, "So how are you going to respond to her
Yeah.
question? What's the answer? What are you going to say?" And so I said yes, unfortunately. And
Mm.
so I remember just being like, "Why did I say that?" Because like now
Yeah.
she's gonna tell people that who are
Yeah.
gonna want to meet me or like know me. And so anyway, it was I high school feels like such a fever dream, and like
Mm.
I almost felt like Hannah Montana in like not a great way.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like I got involved. My school had a Bible club. There was like this one of the school counselors. She was Christian, but like there's a lot of rules around public schools. Like she can't pray or like she can't whatever whatever. But like she could facilitate students doing it for each other, and
Mm-hmm.
so she pretty much just opened up her classroom once a week for us to like go in there. We would like read scripture, sing worship, and she would
Wow.
kind of just be in the room, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I always felt so convicted because I would get to school, I would spend the first 45 minutes to an hour of the day um, in Bible club, and then immediately walk out of her classroom and be a heathen the rest of the 7 hours that I'm at school. And so it just was really hard. I dated guys, I dated girls all throughout
Mm-hmm.
high school, and there was just constant battle of like, and it literally even spilled out into my adult life after high school, where it was like
Wow.
I would talk to a guy, and Holy Spirit would be like, "You can't do
What are you
this."
doing? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd be like, "Okay, I have to stop talking to him," and then
Yeah.
I'd be interested in a girl, and then I would start pursuing her, and then my flesh is like, "Okay, but do you really like girls? Do you
Mm.
really?" And so then I'd be like, "Okay, well, I don't want to waste her time, so let me stop talking to her," and it just caused this like cycle of being in and out of relationships, in and out of talking to people because I just couldn't find peace,
Yeah.
like in either direction.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was essentially my whole high school journey. And during the
Wow.
same time, I'm still like, my parents are going to church, so I'm still going to church on Sundays, and I'm
Mhm.
involved in a lot of different things. Like I was involved in the youth program at my parents' church and all these things. So it wasn't like I was just like not engaging with like Holy
Yeah.
Spirit or God at all. It
Yeah.
just was a struggle.
Yeah.
And so going into college, or I should say before that, my senior year of high school, I had a friend of mine who, which we're still friends now. She also lives here in New York. But we were friends in high school, and she invited me. She was like, "Hey, like my church is doing this big youth thing. It's a big party. You should come."
Mhm.
Which they were what were riot nights at the time, and
Okay.
so she invited me to a riot night,
Okay.
and I had never like I grew up in a very like small, maybe like 20 congregant church,
Wow.
where like the youth program was like me and my cousins, like
You're like,
essentially.
glad to see you again.
Yeah, right. And so I had never, that was my first time in my life, like when I went there, I had never seen so many teenagers who were like falling
Wow.
on their face, crying, like quoting scripture.
Yeah.
Like it was just an environment I had never experienced before.
Wow.
And yeah, and so from there I was like going to riot. They were once a month, and so every month we
Mhm.
were like, me and some friends from school were like going to riot nights. And so after we graduated high school, I continued to go to them, and so that's kind of how that transitioned from like that's kind of how I got connected with like celebration, and essentially
Okay.
SEU was like my friend invited me when I was a riot student, and then I just
Okay.
kind of stayed connected. And so fast forward, it's like my freshman, I would say my freshman or sophomore year of college. This is right before I
Mhm.
came to ministry school. And so at this time, I was working, I started working full time at a warehouse. I
Mhm.
hated it. It was I was making a lot of money, but it just wasn't great. It was just manual labor, you know, whatever.
Mhm.
And during this time, I was still living at home, but I just was like, the Hannah Montana phase had just got so much worse. Where like, this is now just not beyond like, you know,
Yeah.
talking to boys in the hallways and then like going to read my Bible with like a teacher.
Yeah.
This is like one night I'm like going out to a gay club, and then like the next day I'm like at church, like
Yeah. It's
totally
real.
like the extremes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I just remember I was, and I was still like visiting celebration here and there, but I was still primarily at my parents' church.
Mhm.
And I remember being at work. I was walking around the warehouse, and I feel like it was so the Lord. But I would say maybe about 3 months before this particular day, they had like radio stations, so they would shuffle at work
Mhm.
like throughout the whole facility of the warehouse. Well, one of the stations was like a K Love like
Mhm.
station. And
Mhm.
so I remember like being at work, the K Love station is going, so there's Christian music flowing, and I'm just like, oh, okay, I love this, like whatever, whatever. So that station ends, and like secular music is like playing again. But I just remember right before the station goes off, the last song that played was "Come to the Altar"
Mhm.
by Hillsong, and I like stopped in my tracks, and I just remember breaking down crying in the middle of that
Wow.
warehouse, because it was like, you know, the lyrics like, have you come to the end of yourself over what, like, it was like
Yeah.
in that moment I got like a glimpse, like a 30-second reel of just like a real heart check, like what I've been doing with my
Mhm.
life. Like it was like all of my sin was just like flashing in my face, and I was just like,
Yeah.
I've already encountered the Lord. Like what am
Wow.
I doing with, like what am I doing with myself? Like, well,
Mhm.
how am I living my life, whatever. And so I remember being like, I need to go to church. Like,
Mhm.
and it was a Wednesday. I typically, my parents' church had a Wednesday night service, but because I was an adult, my parents didn't like force me to go, and so
Mhm.
I typically didn't go to church on Wednesday nights. And so I just remember being like, I need to be in the presence of God today. And
Wow.
so it just was so the Lord, because that same day I was like, I'm gonna go to celebration, because the worship I experienced there was like just different. And
Mhm.
so I remember being like, I need to go to celebration today. And so my boss came to me, he's like, hey, like, we got a lighter load, so if you want to head out an hour early, you can. And so I was able to leave work early. I literally drove straight to celebration.
Wow.
And as I was like walking up to the church, my friend, her name's Macy, who I went to school with, she was in
Mhm.
like the courtyard talking to some like students. And so here I am walking up to the church, and she's like, the first thing she said was, she was like, I'm so glad to see you. Like, she's like, I don't know what you're doing here. It's like, I'm glad you're here, but I'm just so glad that you're here.
Wow.
And I just like tears in my eyes. I just was like, I'm so good to see you, but like, I really need to go inside. And she's like, okay. And so, yeah, I just remember being like wrecked by worship. The message
Wow.
was really, really like just something I really needed to hear.
Hmm.
And yeah, that same night, I like they did an altar call, and I like rededicated my life to God.
Wow.
And so that is what started the trajectory of like everything. And so I
Yeah.
like left my parents' church, started going to Celebration full time, and that kind of picks up into the pre ministry school story of like I joined Celebration, started serving, and just like
Hmm.
I just was like, if I'm gonna come back, I wanted to be serious.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so that was my story all like through college, through ministry school. I think I'm just kind of catching us up to where we to
Yeah.
where we are now. Um, but yeah, and so that was kind of the case. And I think honestly, because like growing up in a Christian like household,
Hmm.
my parents didn't really provide space. I mean, and not that they necessarily were supposed to, but didn't really provide space for me to process a lot of the stuff like surrounding my
Hmm.
sexuality, and it just
Yeah.
got suppressed. And so what
Yeah.
happened was that I went through years, like over 5 years of just suppressed emotions. And I'm like
Hmm.
actively serving in ministry. I'm doing all these things. And this is 2024. I would say summer, yeah, summer
Hmm.
2023,
Hmm.
um, all the stuff I had been suppressing just resurfaced. And it was
Wow.
like so much, like I never really took the time to deal with
Hmm.
the attraction, deal with the emotions. I just was
Yeah.
like, I'm not supposed to feel this. I can't do this. So let's just bottle it up and throw it away.
Yep.
And I just kept suppressing until like I just internally like couldn't handle it anymore.
Wow.
And so it put me in this place where I just felt like I remember going and talking to Pastor PD, who's like anyone listening,
An
he's like
incredible, incredible man.
incredible man. He was one of my professors in school.
Yes.
He now has his PhD in theology. That man is literally
He's so smart.
he's big brain. Love
Yeah.
that man.
Mhm. Thank you.
And so I remember like having a meeting with him, and I was like, I just feel like I don't even know who I am. I feel like I'm starting
Wow.
over. Like,
Hmm.
and I went through this season during 2023 of like, kind of like, I remember telling God, I'm like, I feel like I need to like almost like re-walk through some of these things. And
Mm.
it wasn't like I was asking God to let me necessarily sin again,
Yeah.
but I was like, Lord, there are so many things. I wanted to eliminate the ifs. There are things that like because I was sheltered, you know,
Yeah.
in a good way, but like sheltered as a kid, there
Yeah.
were things I didn't get to experience, worlds I didn't get to navigate, and things that I feel like I really needed to unpack.
Hmm.
And so I remember being like, God, like I don't know, like I feel like some of these things I need to unpack are like wrong, but I feel like I need to
Yeah.
unpack them to move forward.
Yeah.
And I just remember like Lord being like, okay, I'm gonna take a step back.
Wow.
I will give you the space to process it. And I just
Wow.
remember being like, during that time, I was like, kind of wilding. I wouldn't say I was like fully back out in the world, but I was kind of
Yeah.
doing a lot of things that I had stopped doing. I was starting to do again. But it was
Yeah.
in the mindset of like, this is me. Like I don't want to get to a point in my life ever where there's like a what if? What if I didn't
Hmm.
do this thing? What if I,
Yeah.
you know, like I just needed to eliminate the what ifs because I felt like
Yeah.
later in my life the what ifs would cause me to sin later, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. And so I'm
Good.
like, I need to do this now. And so
Hmm.
I went through that was like July 2023. So I would say from July 2023, honestly, right up until earlier this year, maybe like
Wow.
March of this year, I was just in this place of like, I don't know. People would ask me different things. There were people around me who were like asking me about like my sexuality or asking me about my thoughts. And I'm like, I don't really have an answer
Mm.
for that right now because I'm in
Yeah.
this like rediscovery place. But
Hmm.
I remember telling the Lord when He gave me the space back last July. I was like, okay, Lord, but if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna be committed to being in proximity. So I was like,
Wow.
yes, like it didn't matter. Like there were so many days I came to church on Sunday. Just being totally honest, I was like hungover from going out the night
Hmm.
before. But I was just committed. I'm like, if I'm gonna be in this place, in this like valley, in this like whatever, I refuse to not be in proximity to God. So I'm still gonna prioritize being in church on Sunday. I'm still gonna
Yeah.
prioritize like worshiping regularly because I'm like, what I'm not gonna do is allow the world to pull me away from Him. I know I need to
Mm.
process these things,
Hmm.
but I'm not gonna allow myself to be in a position of like being pulled away from the Lord. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
I didn't care. I was like, I whatever. And so, and I
Yeah.
really feel like that paid off because, like I would say, like this spring going into this summer, everything kind of came full circle, and I heard him. I like listened to this message here in New York after I moved, and that was another thing too. Sorry, before I moved, New York is such a free for all kind of place,
Yeah.
and so I was like, I cannot move. I made sure to cover myself so much spiritually. I like was meeting with Pastor PD regularly. I was like,
Wow.
I made it a priority. Like the first thing on my docket when I moved here was like find a church, get plugged in. Do not give yourself any space to find community anywhere else.
Yeah.
Find a church, get plugged in. So I did that, and that's been a blessing, and we can kind of talk about that too. But and so yeah, and so I moved to New York, and I heard a message, and it pretty much was from the scripture that says like, what does it cost someone to gain the world and lose their soul? And that message, when I tell you it wrecked me, Cass, it
Wow.
wrecked me. And I don't think I've ever been so postured for surrender. I remember that same day I just prayed and I was like, Lord, take everything. Like
Wow.
I know what I want my career to be. I have a vision for my career, but if that's not what you want from me, okay, great. Okay,
Wow.
great. I don't care. Like there are so many things that I've been wanting and desiring for my life, and one of the things I had to lay down was my attraction because months prior I was like, you know, there are so many people who are, you know, who are queer and are Christian or have this
Yeah.
relationship with Jesus, and I was like, can I
Yeah.
be that person? Like, you know, is that a thing? Is that like a, you know, is there a false sense of peace around that? Like I just had so many questions, and so one of the things the Lord really had me surrender was my desires, and I'm like,
Wow.
okay, I'm like, I have them, they're there, I'm not going to act like they don't exist, but if I'm not supposed to carry them, I'm not going to.
Wow.
And so as freshly as July 2024, I
Wow.
just feel so like newly redeemed in the Lord of like knowing who I am, knowing what he wants for me, and like
Yeah.
just genuinely trusting him to guide my steps moving forward.
Yeah.
There's so much unknown, but I'm genuinely just like leaving it to God. And
Yeah.
looking back, I'm just grateful that the Lord had so much trust. Like he knew he wasn't gonna let me go, but he also knew I wasn't gonna let him go. Like he genuinely was like, I know I can give you the space to figure this out and
Yeah.
to process this because I know at the end of the day you are gonna come back to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just remember being like, who am I that the Lord would have so much trust in me,
Wow.
my flesh, that I
Yeah.
would literally have a prodigal son moment or a prodigal son
Yeah.
season of like walking away
Yeah.
from him and trusting that he would come back. That's my story. That's my story
That
from then
literally.
to now.
Girls, this one's for you. If you are secretly struggling with pornography addiction, let me be the first one to tell you you are not alone and you are not the only girl struggling with this. I want to introduce you to Arise, a 21-day video series made specifically for Christian women, by women, for women. At Arise, you're going to find a safe, confidential community that will help you and encourage you, and no matter where you are in your journey. It's not just a free program, it's also a place to heal, grow, and realize you're not the only woman struggling with pornography. As someone who struggled for over a decade, I know how incredibly lonesome it can be struggling with this, but also how you feel like you can never overcome. Trust me, you can, and it's possible. Now with a resource like Arise, I wish I had this whenever I was younger. Covenant Eyes is offering the Not For Nothing podcast listeners 30 days of their software for free. So after you finish the 21-day resource and videos, you can now get 30 days free and start your journey to freedom. You can click the link in the description box below and use the code THECASB to get 30 days free. Let's rise above. You got this.
Oh,
I mean, mind blown. How beautiful of a story is that? That literally you told God, like, I have to go figure this out, but I'm not giving up on our relationship. Because even that would happen to me too. Like, I would be like, what if I really do like this certain thing? Because growing up in a Christian home, semi Christian at sometimes too for me, it's like you get sheltered in a good way, like you were saying, but at the
yeah.
same time, it's like you don't get to experience things, but other people that might be outside of the faith or might do the normal worldly things get to. And I remember I turned 21. I was like, I think I want to experience alcohol. Like, I've never done that. My parents are totally against it. Like, I was raised in a no alcohol home, and I went out
Yeah.
there and I went crazy. And I remember thinking, like, probably for a good year this was going on, and I was doing the whole Hannah Montana thing too. I was like walking both sides. I was like, okay, wait, I can kind of do this and like get away with it and, you know, go crazy, and I can still show up to church on Sunday and be fine and serve
Yeah.
and everything. And it just wrecked me, and I was like, wait, I think I'm trying to figure out like what this is to me as a 21-year-old, as an adult, rather than having my parents tell me what it is or
Yeah.
whatever. And I think that what if is important to explore within appropriate bounds because I think you're always going to wonder, like, wait, would I have liked the party scene? Wait, would I have liked, you know, dual attraction? And then God allowing you to experience those. I think that free will is so beautiful because it's almost like he has like a leash and he's like, yeah, go sniff, like go see what you think.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, I'm back. Like it wasn't really that, you know, like it's just so,
literally.
I can just see him now doing that. And that's so beautiful about your story. And I think so many people are ashamed to talk about it. I know I am. Like, whenever I was in kindergarten, first grade, that's where the dual attraction thing I struggle with too. And I've never talked about it to anybody because I'm shameful of it and I hold a lot of guilt over it. But we're so young and we don't really know what's going on. It's just curiosity. And the moment that it happened, I will never forget. It was in a Christian school and I was within like very safe, appropriate bounds. And my parents were called, her parents were called, our other friends' parents were called. And it was this crazy thing. And I've held on to that for so long. And I think the enemy's been like, I think you're attracted to girls. And I'm like, no, that's not truth. That's not truth. And you kind of like bottle it up and you don't handle it. Yeah. And then pornography enters the scene. And I'm like, okay, wait, now that's a whole other thing. Like now I've got to like, that's like two things against me, you know? And then therapy entered. And I was like, okay, wait, I can talk about these things to somebody and like unraveling all of that. And like knowing that that held me in bondage longer. And then this kept me in bondage longer, like crazy. Yeah. And so I wish that there's a way that we could tell the youth or middle schoolers or even elementary kids nowadays, which is so sad. Because I think now the youngest age is like 4 or 5 that kids are getting exposed to pornography and exposed to like really harmful things. And it's like, why is this so young? Why is this turned to be? And then we have to deal with it the rest of our lives because now it's like it's imprinted in us and we're like, wait, is this who I am? Now I have identity issues. Yeah. And I'm like, wait, is this who I am or is this something I was just troubled with as a kid, you know? Right. And so I wish there was a way that we could tell like the younger generation and, you know, middle schoolers, like it's okay to question. It's okay to say like, what if X, Y, and Z, like that's okay. But like how you deal with it and how you process it is another. Yes. And I feel like as Christians, as parents and everything, like it's our duty to create that safe space of like, you're going to question things. You're going to hear things. You're going to see pornography. You're going to see X, Y, and Z. But like, how you handle it is okay, and you can come to me and talk about it. You know, if my parents would have said, hey, you know, I have great parents, but sometimes I wish that they would have handled things differently of like, hey, if you saw this, or if you think that you're gay, or if you think X, Y, and Z, like come talk to me. I think it would have gone a lot different. I think that I would have been like, okay, I saw something I didn't mean to today. Like, what does that mean? But instead it's almost like we're scared to because we're shameful, we're guilty, whatever. But that's the enemy's ploy to keep us in that like addicted space and that you know place where we feel like we can't talk to anybody about it, we can never get out and all these things. But I think your story is absolutely beautiful, and I can see point A to point B, like just the crazy transformation, and that just goes to prove that we're never done transforming. We're never done out of that changing season, and it's never too late to come to God and be like, wreck me. But also change me, like change my heart, like how you said it was last year and then it was just up until, you know, June or July of this year. That just goes to prove that it might take a little bit. The valley might be a little bit longer, but I think it's even sweeter because you get to take your time. He gets to take his time with you, that intentional time, and shape you in what you believe in your heart on things. And I think that's so awesome. It's hard to not see God anywhere all over that. Like everywhere I see what you just shared, like you were beaming from ear to ear talking about it, and it's just so cool to be able to see that and to know more about it. Because honestly, before I was like, oh yeah, it's Tavian. Like he's went to SCU and he went to Celebration Forever, and that's really all. And he's really cool at graphic design. Like that's all I know. But now hearing that, it makes so much more sense. And I think that I truly do think that God's going to use that in such a huge way. And even knowing that I think it's all about trust. I think it's all about faith. Like the fact that you were able to be like, I have faith in you, that to know that you're going to do something, but I have to step away for this season, and seeing that like your proximity was a priority. Like you made that a priority, I think is beautiful. Because a lot of people are like, I want to go test the world and see what the world has to see, so I'm going to see you later. Like they don't actually bring him, or they don't have that relationship still. And the fact that you showed up to church hungover, okay, you're still at church, period.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of people just don't go. They're like, no, I feel shameful. No, I feel, I can't be welcomed there. But the fact that you knew that you were welcome there, that he still wanted you there, the fact that you made that a priority for you when you could have just put it on the back burner is
Yeah.
beautiful. And I think that really shows a testament of your character and your heart. And so thank you for sharing that. I really do appreciate that.
Of course, of course.
So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about now in your career path. So
Yeah.
you've worked a lot of random jobs. So one time we were working at Fanatics randomly together, which was
Yes.
odd and weird. So you worked at Fanatics, you worked at, the warehouse job, and you also worked at Nordstrom, is that right?
Yes. Yeah,
So did that
yeah.
kickstart the fashion kind of area for you, or in Forever
Yes.
21, I guess, too?
Yeah, so it was, I feel like for me, whenever I talk about like, because a lot of people do know me for like my graphic design stuff, and I feel like that was a very prominent thing for me as far as like being creative.
Yeah.
But I feel like fashion was like always that thing in the background. Like it was there, and I didn't really give it as much attention as I gave graphic design, but like it was just kind of, in the back seat. But yeah, I feel like I've always like been. I feel like I've always been into from as early as I've been able to dress myself, I will say. I
Yeah.
feel like I've always just been super intentional about like making sure everything I'm wearing looks good. I've always been into like clothing. And I mentioned the part about like literally drawing school clothes that I didn't get to have
Yeah.
and like making the outfits that I wish I could have like been wearing. But yeah, I feel like it was always in the background. I've always been into style. I remember being in high school and the idea of having my own clothing like line kind of came to my head. And I remember telling myself, I was like, oh yeah, like, I think that's something I'll get to one day. And even like once I was out of like out of college, or even like while I was in college, like, cool, great, like I'm gonna get my graphic design degree, and after I've been a graphic designer for, let's just say, I don't know, 5 years, then I'll start like pursuing my fashion career,
Yeah.
whatever. But I feel like I got into my graphic design career very quickly. The pipeline from ministry school to intern to on staff full time ministry happened very quickly for me,
Yeah.
and so I found myself in a place where I was working full time ministry as a social media like graphic designer and content creator, and which I loved that season from a creative perspective.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things where I was like, and even after that, so I transitioned from that to doing Nordstrom, doing retail, because during that time, while I was working my full-time ministry job, I also started dabbling into styling. I started making content on social media during that same season. And so that was kind of when the ball was really like actively rolling about like, fashion. Oh, I actually kind of have an eye for this. I kind of really enjoy this. And so I kind of leaned into it some more. And so me transitioning from ministry to going to working at Nordstrom was me kind of pivoting a little bit from like, I guess, getting my foot wet in like the fashion world a little bit. And so I worked at Nordstrom for a while, had some really great experiences. On the tail end, it wasn't so amazing. Just retail life can be a little bit of a struggle. And so
Yeah.
I ended
Crazy
up,
people.
yeah. And so here I was with this background in graphic design. I was ready to not be in retail.
Yeah.
And so I ended up applying for a job, like a graphic design job with Fanatics that I ended up getting. I did that for 2 years. And so it was about a year and a half into Fanatics that I was like, okay, I'm working in corporate, graphic designer, degree in graphic design. This is crazy. And it's like, it was almost like I kind of was like getting bored. Like, okay, like I have done the graphic designer thing. Like I did it. Like I can check the
Yeah.
box. And it
Yeah.
was like I got to a point where it's like I know I want to pursue fashion, but it was this far off thing. And I remember like there just was so many things I was processing as far as like career. And I remember praying one day and I was like, God, like just tell me what I am supposed to be prioritizing. This was before I started working at Nordstrom. And he was like, prioritize graphic design, prioritize fashion. And so I was like, okay, cool, great. And so I remember being at Fanatics and I was like, why am I waiting to start my fashion career? Who said I had to wait? I could literally start today. Like, what?
Yeah.
And so that kind of started the slow burn of like, okay, like I think I'm ready to pivot career wise. And so I ended up, I New York City was a city that I've been dying to visit. I had vacationed there a couple of times, and I don't know why. I always felt like New York was going to be a really good place for me. Obviously, it's like the fashion capital, like of
Yeah.
our country at least, and I think
Yeah.
globally as well. And
Hmm.
so I was like, dang, one day I really want to move to New York. And literally in the same breath, the Lord was like, why wait? Literally, why wait?
I'd have been like,
I'm like,
okay, I'm going.
yeah, I was like, you have no kids,
Yeah.
you have no, you're not married, you have no major ties to being in your
Yeah.
hometown, like go. And
Yeah.
so I prayed for a season, I fasted, and I didn't feel the Lord was pulling me to go in any other direction or to stay. And so
Wow.
I made the decision that I was going to move to New York and pursue my fashion career. And I literally quit my job, moved to New
Wow.
York, fully unemployed, fully
Hmm.
unemployed. Like literally only
The
had the money.
trust. The trust.
Yeah, I'm telling you, literally only had the money for like first month's rent and like some grocery money. And I was
Wow.
like, I don't know, God. I felt like
Yeah.
you called me here, so I'm like, you're gonna have to fill in the gaps.
Provide.
Yeah, and when I tell you, he did exactly that. People like
Wow.
the job market in New York is horrible, and I was in New York for a week and a half and got a job. Got hired on the spot at a job
Wow.
working at Nordstrom again, which is fine.
Hmm.
And then a few weeks later, I got hired. I worked part time at a gym as well.
Hmm.
And so that happened really quick. That does not happen that fast for like anyone.
Yeah.
And so that was a blessing. And it's just been, I feel like this season for me, since I've been in New York, I've never had to lean on the Lord
Hmm.
so much. Like I've never had to have so much trust in him because there's just been so much unknown. But
Yeah.
he has literally been faithful to fill every single gap. Every time that I doubted or feared that something was going to go wrong, it never did. And God's just been super faithful, and so I'm just really grateful. But yeah, so I'm in New York now. I am back working in retail. Sad face because I didn't want to be back in retail, but I'm grateful. I'm very very grateful. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm in the process now of just getting myself established as a stylist here. I've been
Hmm.
networking a lot, and I did a soft launch of my own brand right before I left Jacksonville.
Hmm.
And so now that I'm here in New York, I'm also starting the process of like really fleshing out what my brand looks like, doing some sketches,
Yeah.
aspiring and planning for some fashion shows hopefully down the line.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm like every day I wake up and it feels like a dream because I'm like, there's no way I'm in New York City as
Yeah.
a
Living your best
designer.
life.
Literally,
Yeah.
I keep making TV references, but I literally feel like Carrie Bradshaw. Like I'm literally doing the thing, you know.
I love that.
But yeah,
That's awesome. And like to see it, I mean, literally a 180 from like living here in Florida. I mean, from Florida to New York, I can only imagine the cultural difference
yeah,
there, like the culture shock that you must have felt because obviously Jacksonville, if you've never been to Jacksonville, it's a crazy city, but also it's kind of on the smaller end. Like yeah, I mean you can go over a highway for a very long time and you're still in Jacksonville, but New York, I mean the hustle and the bustle. I feel like
yeah,
there's no parking. I've went to Boston before, and there's literally no parking lots. The parking lots don't even exist. I can probably imagine the same thing for New York and the crazy people and the crazy. I mean, I feel like it's always up and running, and at least there's no quiet hours. I feel
yeah,
like from what I see on Netflix. Um, which that I mean that lifestyle for you. Whenever you're like, I'm going to New York, and like everything that I was reading on social media, I was like, that's so Tavian. But
mm,
also like seeing how happy you are there, and like that you're thriving, and that it's like you're living your best life. Like that is so awesome, and how cool of God to be like to plant that little seed inside of you from such a
yeah,
young age. To I mean, could you have even told your younger self that? Hey, and if in a handful of years, like we're gonna move to New York City, and I'm gonna work at Nordstrom and be a stylist and have my own fashion line and do social media and be a graphic designer. Like, can you imagine like what you would have been like?
he would not have been able to
No.
process.
Yes. So repeat that back one more time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that is so crazy, but also just shows like the Lord's faithfulness all over it. So I'm literally so happy for you, and I think you deserve the world, and I think that's such a great opportunity, and that's inspiration to me, like to do the dang thing. Like, why
Yeah,
sit around? Like, if you don't have any ties, if you don't have any kids, if you're not in a relationship, whatever, just do the dang thing. Like, you don't
yeah,
have to wait for like a meteor to hit or lightning to strike to do it.
yeah,
Like pray and fast, like you were saying, and that also shows immense faith that you were able to be like, yes, my desire is to move to New York, but what's God's desire? Like the fact that you were still seeking out His desire for your life is incredible, and a lot of people take that for granted. They're like, oh yeah, God moved with me, but like, is God really moving with you, or are you
yeah.
asking Him before you move? So that's awesome. As we wrap up, I want to ask. So the question I've been wondering is, what is that question at the end of the podcast that like I can ask people that have a good answer. So obviously, the name of the podcast is not for nothing. Everything that we go through, like your testimony right there. I mean, literally, I was listening to it and I was like, "Well, that's the whole reason for the podcast. Like what you went through was not for nothing."
Yeah.
So if you could tell a younger version of yourself or a younger person in this world that is going through something that you went through, whether it's in middle school, whether it's in high school, whether it's fresh out of high school into college years, if you could tell that person that has the same kind of road as you that you walked with dual attraction, with bullying, with anything like that that you grew up with, what would you tell them? What would be the thing that you would tell them or to encourage them with of like, hey, you know, I know that you're walking through the same path, but this is what helped me, or how would you encourage them?
That's a really good question. Um, I think I think the biggest thing for me, what has been when I look back, and I just kind of compare things, I think the biggest thing for me is, and it's so simple, but like God is our Father. Like,
Mm,
like, like we say that all the time, and I feel like, because He's God, like we have this big, universal like picture of who He is, but like no, like on a very practical, real, tangible level, He is
yeah.
our Father. And so I think on so many seasons of my life where the Lord was with me, and He just treated me like a father. And so I feel like
Mm,
my encouragement would be for anyone who is struggling with like identity or dual attraction or whatever, like you can talk to God about anything.
wow.
There's nothing that shocks Him. There's nothing surprising to Him. First of all, He knew you before you knew you. So there's nothing you could bring to Him that He isn't
Yeah.
already prepared for. Like like the Bible says, His grace is sufficient. Like it
Mm,
is sufficient for us. And so I feel like one of the biggest things is just the biggest advice I would give anyone is just to constantly remind yourself that God is our Father. He has
mm,
grace. He is loving. He desires for you to be successful. He desires for you to
wow.
win. He can handle everything. I've literally had conversations with God where I'm like, God, I don't like that you did that. That was upsetting to me. That hurt me. And He can handle it. Like
Yeah.
he doesn't get offended by us. Like
Yeah.
he can handle our emotions, all of us, the fullness of who we are, because He's
Mhm.
the one who made us who we are.
Yeah.
And so I think like the biggest advice would just be to remember that He's our Father and never feel
Mm,
like you have to turn away from Him. You can take
yeah.
quite literally everything to Him. You can take
Mm,
everything to Him. He can handle it. He has room for it. He has grace for it. He has love for it. He has mercy for it. Um, and yeah, the best place you can be, the best place you can go, whether you're happy, sad, feeling lonely, He is always going to be the best place to go to.
mm,
And
wow.
I think that would be the advice. Is just stay in proximity.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
literally what you said earlier in your story was like the best place that I could go was close to him, and that literally shows through in everything that you shared. And I just want to thank you for being vulnerable. And I know it's scary sharing, parts of your testimony online, and I know it can be intimidating, but I know that somebody's going to resonate with that out there. And even for you to think like if it was years ago and me as a young girl, I would have been listening to this and be like, oh my gosh, like I went through the same thing he did. Like just imagine how many more
Yeah.
young kids, people our age that even went through that as a young kid that are suppressing it and bottling it down, like deep down,
Yeah.
how encouraging this will be. And hopefully this will be a chance and a catalyst for them to seek help, to seek therapy, to seek someone
Yes.
with a PhD, at their church they can
Literally.
meet with, and that can talk them through it too, because bottling it down and pushing it down is only going to make a bigger outburst later. So it's better to
Yes.
handle it, whether it's grief, whether it's a season of life that you're walking through where you're mad at God, whatever it is, it's better to be vulnerable. It's better to be open. If you have friends around you, if you have, a big brain at a church that you can, get with and start therapy or whatever that looks like for you, do it, because you don't want to handle the aftermath after it all blows up later. It's rather to almost like de-trigger the bomb before it blows up. So
Yeah.
I just want to thank you for coming on and being our
Of
first
course.
guest. It was an honor to have you, and I can't wait to talk to you later and see, oh yeah, I created my own fashion line, and I'm in New York Fashion Week. I'm gonna be like, okay, period, King. Like I knew that was coming. That's so
Yeah.
true.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Well, thanks for having me. It's been a blast. Glad we got the chance to do this. And yeah, I'm again, just super happy for you, super proud of you for taking this step yourself. Super excited to see where the pod goes. I know it's going to be great. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Tavian. Well, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so
Alrighty.
much.
Of course. Talk to you
All
later.
right, bye.
Bye.